He told his pregnant wife she wasn't good enough anymore. While she was painting a nursery, he was packing a suitcase. He traded her and their unborn child for a younger model and a faster path to the top. He left her with nothing but hospital bills and eviction notices. But he forgot one thing his greatest rival, the billionaire Julian Thorne, was watching. And in the world of the elite revenge is a dish served not cold, but on a golden platter. This is the story of how a rejected wife and a sworn enemy built an empire and raised the son he abandoned. The smell of pale blue paint still clung to Eleanor Sterling's clothes, a soft, powdery scent of new beginnings. At 8 months pregnant, every movement was a negotiation, but she'd spent the entire day hanging decals of cartoon whales and fluffy clouds. She smiled, one hand pressed to the swell of her belly, where her son Oliver was kicking in agreement. "Just wait until you see it, Richard," she murmured, rehearsing the moment. Richard was late, but that was normal. His work at Sterling and Vance Financial was his everything. He was on the cusp of a major promotion, a partnership that would finally rocket them into the social stratosphere he craved. The click of the key in the lock of their penthouse apartment was sharper than usual. "Rick, you're home," Eleanor called, waddling out of the nursery. "You have to see what I—" She stopped. He wasn't in his usual rumpled suit. He was wearing a crisp new charcoal blazer, a silk shirt she didn't recognize, and he was carrying a leather carry-on bag. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking past her, at the imported Italian marble of their foyer. "Richard, what's wrong? Is that a new bag?" "We need to talk, Eleanor," he said. His voice was flat, devoid of the warmth she'd known for 7 years. A cold dread sharper than any pregnancy pain seized her. "You're scaring me. Did something happen with the deal?" "Is it Julian Thorne again?" "I know he's been trying to—" "This isn't about Thorne," Richard interrupted, finally meeting her eyes. The coldness there made her flinch. "This is about us. Or rather the fact that there is no us anymore." Eleanor laughed, a tight, nervous sound. "What are you talking about? Don't joke, Rick, I'm too tired." "I'm not joking." He set the bag down with a heavy, final thud. "I'm leaving you. The divorce papers will be served tomorrow." The world tilted. The paint fumes so sweet moments ago now seemed suffocating. "Leaving Richard, I'm 8 months pregnant. We just finished the nursery." She pointed a desperate, trembling gesture. "That's the problem, isn't it?" He sneered, and the transformation of his face from husband to stranger was terrifying. "Look at you. You're domestic. You've let yourself go. You're covered in paint. You're comfortable." I'm pregnant," she cried, the words tearing from her throat. "And I'm ambitious," he shot back. "My career is taking off. The Vanderbilt deal is done. I'm securing the partnership." "That's wonderful. So why?" "Because the partnership isn't just a job, Eleanor. It's a life. It's a certain kind of life. A life that doesn't involve this." He gestured vaguely at her swollen body. "I need a wife who fits that life. A wife who can stand next to me at the gala, not one who's nesting." "A wife?" The word was poison. "You mean there's someone else?" He had the decency to look away for a second, but his resolve hardened. "Yes, Chloe Vanderbilt." Eleanor collapsed against the wall, her hand flying to her stomach, as if to protect her son from the words. Chloe Vanderbilt, the CEO's daughter, a 24-year-old socialite known for her Instagram feed and her ruthless ambition. She's half my age, Richard." "She's what I need," he said, his voice like ice. "She understands what it takes. Her father, Mr. Robert Vanderbilt, is thrilled. We're getting married as soon as the divorce is finalized." "The divorce?" Eleanor was hyperventilating. What about the baby? What about our son? Richard sighed, picking up his bag as if this were a mild inconvenience. I've thought about that. Honestly, Eleanor a baby right now would be complicated. It would look messy. I'll provide a one-time settlement, a severance, if you will. But after that, you're on your own. I'm starting fresh. A severance, she whispered, the indignity of the word striking her numb. This is your child. Don't make this dramatic. He walked to the door. The apartment is in the company's name. The lease is terminated. You have 48 hours to vacate. My lawyers will handle the rest. 48 hours, Richard. I have nowhere to go. I have nothing. I gave up my career for you to support your dream. And that was your choice, he said, his hand on the doorknob. You chose to be a wife. I'm choosing to be a success. He looked back one last time, his eyes sweeping over her, the woman who had put him through business school, who had networked for him, who was carrying his child. There was no love, no remorse, only mild, irritated pity. Goodbye, Eleanor. Try to land on your feet. The door closed with a heavy, expensive click. The sound echoed in the massive, empty apartment. Eleanor stood frozen for a minute, then two. The silence was absolute. She looked at her paint-stained hands. Then a primal scream of grief and rage ripped through her, a sound of profound animalistic betrayal. She stumbled into the perfect blue nursery, past the empty crib and the cheerful mocking wails, and collapsed, her body shaking with sobs that racked her entire frame. She was alone. She was penniless. And she was about to bring a child into a world that had just been shattered. The 48 hours passed in a blur of humiliation. The bank informed her that her joint accounts had been frozen. The credit cards were declined. Richard, true to his word, had severed her from his life, as neatly as trimming a loose thread. She sold her grandmother's engagement ring, the one Richard had insisted she upgrade. But she had kept for sentiment, for cash. It was enough to rent a small, damp one-bedroom apartment in a part of town she'd only ever driven through with the windows up. The walls were thin, the smell of mildew and boiled cabbage was permanent, and the sound of sirens was constant. Eleanor, a woman who had hosted dinner parties for a city's elite, now slept on a second-hand mattress on the floor. Her new reality was a daily exercise in survival. She applied for low-level data entry jobs, but no one wanted to hire a woman who looked ready to give birth at any second. The severance from Richard never arrived. His lawyers stalled, claiming any payment was contingent on a clean and swift divorce. She was being starved out. One rainy Tuesday, a month after Richard left, the first real contraction hit her. It was savage and sudden, weeks before her due date. Panic seized her. She fumbled for her phone, but her service had been cut off. She had no one to call. Gripping her stomach, she stumbled into the hallway, knocking on her neighbor's door. No answer. The pain doubled her over. Desperate, she made her way down the rickety stairs and out into the rain, flagging down a taxi she couldn't afford. The ride to the public hospital was a fresh hell. The driver, a man named Mr. Henderson, saw her agony and the peeling paint of her apartment building. He just nodded his eyes, sympathetic in the rearview mirror. "You'll be okay, miss. We'll get you there." She was rushed into a chaotic emergency room. The birth was fast, brutal, and lonely. There was no hand to hold, no soothing words, just the fluorescent lights and the detached professional voices of the hospital staff. Oliver was born at 3:01 a.m. He was small, shockingly small, but he was breathing. As they placed him on her chest, his tiny, wrinkled face slick with birth, Eleanor felt a surge of love so fierce it eclipsed her despair. "It's you and me, Oliver," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, but I promise I will never, ever let you down." Because he was premature, Oliver was taken to the neonatal intensive care unit, NICU. Eleanor was moved to a shared recovery room. The next morning, frantic to see her son, she shuffled down the hallway to the NICU. She stood outside the double doors, watching through the glass as nurses tended to the rows of tiny incubators. She was a wreck. Her hair was matted. She was wearing a threadbare hospital gown, and the tears wouldn't stop. She was terrified of the medical bills of how she would feed him of everything. It's a heavy burden, isn't it? The voice was deep, smooth, and unexpected. Eleanor turned, startled. A man stood beside her. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a bespoke suit that probably cost more than her entire life savings. He had sharp, intelligent eyes and dark hair just starting to silver at the temples. He looked completely out of place in the grim hospital corridor. He too was looking into the NICU. My son is in there, Eleanor managed, wiping her face. My sister's twins, he said, his gaze fixed on a specific incubator. They came too early. He was quiet for a moment, a flicker of vulnerability crossing his face before it was replaced by a mask of polite control. He turned his full attention to Eleanor. You look like you've been through a war. Something like that, she whispered. He studied her, his gaze analytical, but not unkind. This is a hard place to be alone. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a slim, matte black business card. I'm Julian Thorne. Eleanor's breath hitched. Julian Thorne. The name was a thunderclap. This was Richard's mortal enemy. The man Richard had spent years battling, the man he blamed for every deal gone wrong, the man he privately called the Shark. Julian didn't seem to notice her reaction. My family's foundation sponsors this NICU wing. The social workers here are excellent, but they're overwhelmed. If you need anything formula a safe place to live legal counsel, call the number on this card. Ask for Sarah. She'll bypass the red tape. Eleanor stared at the card. Thorne Industries. I can't, she stammered. This isn't charity, Julian said, his voice firm. It's an investment. Healthy children make a healthy city. The foundation exists to solve problems. It looks like you have several. He gave her a curt, professional nod. Good luck with your son. He walked away, his expensive shoes silent on the linoleum. Eleanor was left holding the card, a lifeline from the one person in the world her ex-husband despised more than anyone. The hospital bills arrived 2 days later. The total was astronomical, a figure so high Eleanor felt the air leave her lungs. The hospital social worker, a kind but stressed woman, informed her that without insurance, which Richard had cancelled, she would be responsible for the full amount. She was trapped. She could declare bankruptcy, but that would ruin any chance of getting a decent job or apartment. Or she could make the call. Her hand trembled as she dialed the number on Julian Thorne's card. She asked for Sarah, and the voice on the other end, previously brusque, immediately warmed. Mr. Thorne mentioned you might call. How can we help you, Ms. Sterling? Eleanor said the name, tasting like ash. Eleanor Sterling. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. 1 moment. She was put on hold for less than 10 seconds before a new voice came on the line. It was Julian Thorne himself. Mrs. Sterling, he said. The politeness was gone, replaced by a tone of sudden, intense interest. I just made the connection. You are Richard Sterling's wife. Ex-wife. Eleanor clarified, her voice shaking. He left me. He left me with nothing. There was a long pause. Meet me tomorrow, Julian said. My office, 10 a.m. Bring every bill, every notice, every document you have. He didn't wait for a reply. The line clicked dead. The Thorne Industries building was a spear of glass and steel that pierced the skyline. Eleanor holding a sleeping Oliver in a borrowed carrier felt impossibly small. She was ushered into a penthouse office with a view that stretched to the ocean. Julian Thorne was behind a massive obsidian desk. He didn't rise. Sit. For an hour he didn't speak. He just read. He read the eviction notice, the bank statements, the threatening letters from Richard's lawyers, the staggering hospital bill. His face was unreadable. Finally, he steepled his fingers and looked at her. "He's not just cutting you loose," Julian said, his voice a low growl. "He's trying to erase you. He knows if you declare bankruptcy, you'll be destabilized, and he can petition for sole custody, later claiming you're an unfit mother or force you to sign away rights for a pittance. Why would he even want custody?" "He doesn't," Julian said. "He wants control. He wants to ensure his messy past can never touch his new life." He leaned forward, his eyes boring into hers. "I have known Richard Sterling for 15 years. We were analysts together at JP Morgan. He didn't just compete with me, Mrs. Sterling. He stole my proprietary algorithm, passed it off as his own, and got me fired. It almost bankrupted me. I had to start over from scratch." Eleanor was stunned. Richard had always painted Julian as the villain. "Richard is a parasite." Julian continued, his voice dangerously calm. "He attaches himself to a host, drains them, and moves to the next. You were his host. Now he's attached to Robert Vanderbilt." "So what happens now?" Eleanor whispered, clutching Oliver closer. "Now we destroy him." Eleanor flinched. I don't want to destroy him. I just want to survive. I want to raise my son." "The two are mutually exclusive," Julian said flatly. "As long as he's powerful, you are a threat to be managed. The only way you will ever be safe is if he has nothing left to take from you. And the only way that happens is if he has nothing." He slid a document across the desk. "This is a contract. The Thorne Foundation will pay all of your medical bills. It will secure you a 2-bedroom apartment in a secure luxury building downtown. It will provide a monthly stipend for your living expenses and a full-time nanny." Eleanor's head was spinning. In exchange for what? Information and loyalty. You were his wife for 7 years. You know how he thinks. You know his habits, his passwords, his private email accounts. You want me to spy for you. "I want you to provide the ammunition," Julian corrected. "I will fire the gun. And one more thing." He looked at Oliver, his expression softening for the first time. "You will also come to work for me. Not at the foundation. Here, at Thorne Industries. I'll start you in accounting where you can't be easily found. But I'll be training you myself." "Why?" "Because, Eleanor," Julian said, standing up and walking to the window. "Richard's greatest mistake wasn't just underestimating me, it was underestimating you. He thinks you're a domestic wife. I read your college transcripts while you were in the waiting room. First in your class, Economics Columbia. You're a shark, just like me. He just forced you to swim in a fishbowl. I'm offering you the ocean." Eleanor looked at the contract, then at her sleeping son. This wasn't just a lifeline. It was a weapon. "What about Oliver?" "Oliver," Julian said, "will be raised as the son of a billionaire. He will have the best of everything. Security, education, and he will never ever have to wonder if his father loves him." Eleanor picked up the pen. "Where do I sign?" While Eleanor was signing her new life into existence, Richard Sterling was living his dream. His wedding to Chloe Vanderbilt was the event of the season, a grotesque display of wealth and status. It was featured in Vogue and Forbes. The pictures were everywhere. Richard looking smug and triumphant. Chloe in a dress worth more than a house looking bored and beautiful. Eleanor saw the photos on her new laptop in her new safe apartment. She felt a brief, sharp pang of her old life. But as she looked at the image, she didn't see the man she had loved. She saw a target. She opened a new encrypted file and began to type. She detailed every private conversation, every whispered ambition, every corner Richard ever cut. She remembered the name of his hidden hard drive. She remembered the secret password he used for his personal ledger. She was no longer a victim. She was an asset. The next 5 years were a montage of brutal, relentless work. Eleanor Vance, she had legally taken her mother's maiden name, arrived at Thorne Industries before the sun rose and left long after it set. The nanny, a kind woman named Maria, effectively co-parented Oliver. True to his word, Julian was a demanding and brilliant mentor. He didn't care about Eleanor's feelings. He cared about her results. He ripped her first 3 financial reports to shreds, forcing her to find the errors. He put her in high-stakes negotiations and watched silently as she learned to fight. "Sentiment is a liability, Eleanor," he would say, his voice echoing in the late-night boardroom. "Richard used your sentiment against you. Never let that happen again. In this world, you are either useful or you are invisible. Choose." She chose to be useful. She wasn't just in accounting anymore. Within 2 years, she was running the acquisitions department. Within 4, she was Julian's official chief operating officer. She was the one who structured the deals, the one who found the weaknesses in their competitors, the one who closed. And Julian's prediction had been right. She was a shark. She was ruthless efficient and saw every problem as a puzzle to be solved. The soft paint-stained wife was gone, replaced by a woman who wore custom-tailored suits, spoke with unassailable authority, and commanded the respect of a building full of high-powered executives. But her transformation wasn't just professional. Her relationship with Julian had evolved. It was not a romance. It was an alliance, forged in a shared goal and a deep mutual respect. He was the only person on earth who understood her. And then there was Oliver. From the beginning, Julian had taken an interest in the boy. He'd stop by her apartment, ostensibly to drop off files, but would end up on the floor, building elaborate block towers with the toddler. As Oliver grew, Julian was the one who taught him to throw a baseball, the one who read him the Wall Street Journal, simplified, he claimed, the one who took him to the Natural History Museum. Richard Sterling, meanwhile, had never once called. He had never asked for a photo. He had never sent a birthday card. He had successfully erased his son. When Oliver was 4, he came home from preschool, confused. "Andrew has a daddy named Dad. My daddy is named Julian. Am I different?" That night, Julian came over. He sat with Eleanor on her sofa, a rare, quiet moment. "He's asking questions," Eleanor said, her voice tight. "He deserves answers," Julian replied. "And he deserves a name." He looked at her, his expression serious. "I want to adopt him, Eleanor. Legally. I want him to be Oliver Thorne. I want to give him my name, my protection, and my legacy. Richard doesn't deserve the title of father." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. "Julian, you don't have to do that. I'm not doing it for you," he said, not unkindly. "And I'm not doing it to spite Richard. I'm doing it because he is my son. In every way that matters." Richard Sterling, happy to be free of his messy past, signed the paternity rights away without a second thought. His lawyers informed him it was a clean break that would protect him from future financial liability. He signed the papers on the hood of his new Bentley. Oliver Sterling became Oliver Thorne. Meanwhile, Richard's life was not the paradise he'd envisioned. Chloe was pathologically expensive. Her father, Robert Vanderbilt, had never fully trusted Richard. He gave him the title of partner, but no real power. Richard was a glorified figurehead, trapped in a golden cage, constantly trying to prove his worth. Their attempts to have a legacy child of their own had failed, a source of bitter private arguments. Richard was stressed, leveraged, and deeply unsatisfied. He had traded his soul for a life that was in the end hollow. The collision course was set. It would happen at the annual Metropolitan Charity Gala, the pinnacle of the city's social calendar. Eleanor Vance, as COO of Thorn Industries, was attending on Julian's arm. She wore a midnight blue gown that skimmed her body. Her hair swept up a diamond necklace, a bonus, from Julian at her throat. She was, in a word, magnificent. Richard was there with Chloe, schmoozing, desperate to land a new client. He was laughing at a banker's bad joke when the room suddenly went quiet. Julian Thorn had arrived. Richard pasted on a false smile, ready to ignore his rival. But then he saw the woman with him. He didn't recognize her. Not at first. This woman was poised, powerful, and radiated an icy confidence that was mesmerizing. She laughed at something Julian said, and the sound was familiar. His blood ran cold. He stared. The hair was different. The body was toned and strong. The face was defined by a new, hard-won beauty. But it was her. "Eleanor," he breathed. Chloe, noticing his distraction, followed his gaze. "Who is that she's with Thorn? Is she his new girlfriend?" Richard couldn't speak. He just stared as Julian Thorn, his greatest enemy, put a protective hand on the small of his ex-wife's back, the wife he had thrown away like trash. Eleanor's eyes scanned the room, cool and assessing. They met Richard's. She didn't flinch. She didn't gasp. She didn't even register shock. She held his gaze for a single, devastating second. Then she looked right through him, as if he were a waiter, and turned back to Julian, dismissing him completely. In that moment, Richard Sterling knew he had made a catastrophic mistake. The gala was the first tremor. The earthquake was still to come. Richard went home in a cold sweat. He tore through his office, digging up his old dusty files on Eleanor. Columbia Economics. He muttered the words, now seeming like a threat. He had seen her. He had seen the way Julian Thorn looked at her, not with lust, but with the respect one power player gives another. "She's his COO," he whispered, the realization hitting him. "She's not his date. She's his second-in-command." He called his lawyer. "That divorce, that settlement. She never cashed the check, did she?" "No, Mr. Sterling." The lawyer replied, confused. "She disappeared. We assumed she... Well, it doesn't matter. You're clear." "Get me everything you can on Eleanor Vance," Richard snapped. "Now." What he found terrified him. Eleanor wasn't just a COO. She was the architect of Thorn's most aggressive and successful hostile takeovers. She was known on the street as the Surgeon for the way she dismantled failing companies and absorbed their assets, and Thorn Industries had just become the primary competitor for the most important contract of Richard's career, the New York City Future Grid project. It was a contract worth billions, a legacy project that would reshape the city's power grid. Vanderbilt's company needed it. Robert Vanderbilt had invested heavily, leveraging other assets, promising the city board a timeline his own engineers called optimistic. Richard was in charge of the pitch. If he failed, he wasn't just out of a job. He and his father-in-law would be ruined. He spent weeks preparing his presentation, his hands shaking. He was no longer competing against Julian Thorn, the rival he understood. He was competing against Eleanor, the woman whose every strength he had mistaken for weakness. The day of the presentation arrived. The boardroom at City Hall was a vast, intimidating space of glass and dark wood, dominated by a U-shaped table where the city's board members sat, their faces impassive. Richard and his team presented first. He tried to be the charismatic salesman he'd always been, but his voice was thin. He made grand promises. He showed flashy renderings. He emphasized the Vanderbilt name. He could feel the board's skepticism. His pitch was all style, no substance. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling," the board chairwoman said, her tone cool. "We'll now hear the presentation from Thorne Industries." The door opened. Julian Thorne walked in. Beside him, holding a slim tablet, was Eleanor Vance. They took their places. "Good morning," Julian began, his voice filling the room. "We all know the future of this city depends on infrastructure that is not just ambitious, but flawless. My company has built a reputation on flawless execution, but the person who designed this entire proposal, the mind behind every data point, is my COO, Ms. Eleanor Vance. The floor is hers." Julian sat down. Eleanor remained standing. She locked eyes with Richard. He felt a bead of sweat roll down his back. "Good morning," she said. Her voice was calm, clear, and cut through the room like a diamond. "Mr. Sterling has presented you with a beautiful dream. I'm here to present you with a reality." For the next 30 minutes, she didn't just present her own plan. She systematically, and without a single shred of emotion, annihilated his. Mr. Sterling's proposal on page 8 promises a 24-month completion timeline. Our analysis, based on public records of their supply chain and current labor commitments, shows this is a 48-month project minimum. They are either lying to the board, or they are lying to their shareholders. Which is it? Richard half rose. "That's an outrageous allegation." Eleanor didn't even look at him. She looked at the board. "It's not an allegation. It's a data point. On this slide, you'll see their primary concrete supplier is already committed to 2 other federal projects. They cannot meet the demand. Our proposal has 3 diversified suppliers already under contract." She continued. "Mr. Sterling's budget on page 12 relies on a Vanderbilt Holdings internal loan. This isn't capital, it's debt. He's leveraging the project before it's even begun. This financial model," she clicked, and a complex chart filled the screen, "is not just optimistic, it's reckless. It exposes the city to massive liability." She walked the board through every line item, exposing the rot at the core of Vanderbilt's company. She used the precise financial language Richard had taught her, the private shorthand he'd used when boasting about creative accounting. She was using his own playbook against him. Finally, she presented the Thorne plan. It was conservative, fully funded, and ironclad. Every risk was mitigated. Every number was backed by 3 sources. When she finished, there was a stunned silence. The board chairwoman looked at Richard. "Mr. Sterling, do you have a rebuttal to Ms. Vance's analysis?" Richard stood his face, a mask of puce-colored rage. He was trembling. This is a personal attack. She's right," a board member muttered, looking at the numbers. "The Thorne proposal is solid," another said. The vote was unanimous. The contract was awarded to Thorne Industries. Richard Sterling had not just lost the deal. He had been publicly, professionally, and utterly humiliated. Richard waited outside the boardroom, his heart hammering against his ribs. The board members filed past, pointedly avoiding his eyes. His father-in-law, Robert Vanderbilt, had already called him twice. Richard let it go to voicemail. The door opened. Julian Thorne and Eleanor Vance walked out, deep in conversation. "Eleanor!" Richard's voice was a desperate croak. They both stopped. Julian raised an eyebrow, an amused, predatory glint in his eye. Eleanor just looked at him, her expression as blank as if he were a stranger asking for directions. "You can't do this!" Richard stammered, his facade of power crumbling. This was a personal vendetta. You poisoned them against me." I used your own numbers. Richard, Eleanor said, her voice quiet. Your proposal was a house of cards. You should be grateful I'm the one who pointed it out, and not a federal auditor. You snake, he hissed, taking a step toward her. Julian moved between them, a silent, immovable object. I wouldn't, he warned. Richard deflated, turning his desperation back to Eleanor. Why, after all these years, to ruin me? Was this all about revenge? Eleanor allowed herself a small, cold smile. Revenge, don't flatter yourself. This wasn't about the past. This was about a contract. You were simply substandard. The casual dismissal was worse than any insult. I gave you everything, he yelled. You gave me 48 hours to vacate an apartment, she corrected him. You gave me a mountain of debt. You gave me nothing. Everything I have, I built. Everything you have, you stole. A terrible realization dawned on his face. This was his plan all along, wasn't it? He pointed at Julian. He found you. He used you to get to me. He turned you into this. He didn't turn me into anything, Richard, Eleanor said, adjusting the cuff of her blazer. He saw me. You were so busy looking at Chloe Vanderbilt, you forgot who you married. You thought I was a house cat. You forgot I was a lioness. Richard was breathing hard, his world collapsing. My company, my marriage. You've destroyed me. No. Julian Thorne spoke for the first time, his voice silky and dangerous. You did this. You just signed the paperwork. We just processed it. And the baby? Richard asked, his voice cracking a last desperate card to play. Our son Oliver. What did you do with him? Is he okay? The temperature in the hallway dropped 20 degrees. Eleanor's face, which had been cold now, became arctic. You will not, she whispered, say his name. He's my son, Richard shouted. He's my son. Julian countered his voice, a lethal whip crack. He is Oliver Thorne. He's a brilliant, happy 6-year-old boy. He's at the top of his class at Brighton Academy. He speaks conversational French, and he's currently deciding if he wants to play polo or learn to code. He has a father who adores him, and a mother who would burn the world down for him. Julian took a step closer, forcing Richard to backpedal. You are nothing to him. You are a biological anecdote, a footnote on a legal document. You signed him away, remember, for free. It was the only smart deal you ever made. This was the final blow. The knowledge that his son, the son he had discarded as messy, was being raised by his greatest enemy, living the very life of privilege Richard had betrayed him for. But we didn't just come here for the contract, Richard, Eleanor said, her voice pulling him back from the brink. What? He whispered. The analysis, Julian said, tapping his tablet. While my COO was reviewing your creative finances, she uncovered a pattern, a rather alarming pattern of wire fraud, embezzlement, and securities violations, all originating from your father-in-law's personal accounts, but all countersigned by you. Richard's face went white. We just won the city contract, Eleanor explained, as if to a child. Which means all of your company's financials, which you submitted as part of your bid, are now public record. And we've already forwarded our analysis to the U.S. Attorney's Office and the SEC. They were very interested. Richard stumbled back, hitting the wall. No, Robert. I just signed. You just signed your own confession, Julian finished. You were so desperate for his approval, you made yourself the scapegoat. And when Robert Vanderbilt has to choose between saving himself and saving his idiot son-in-law, well, he's even more of a shark than I am. Enjoy prison, Richard, Eleanor said. She and Julian turned, and walked away, their footsteps echoing in the corridor. Richard Sterling slid down the wall and sat on the floor, a completely broken man. The checkmate was complete. The fallout was not a quiet crumble. It was a public detonation. The New York Times ran the story above the fold. Vanderbilt Empire crumbles CEO Robert Vanderbilt and son-in-law Richard Sterling, indicted for massive fraud, city contract awarded to Thorn Industries. The story was a masterclass in journalistic evisceration. It detailed not only the reckless financial models and blatant lies in the future grid proposal, but also included an anonymous source who provided a damning analysis of Vanderbilt's broader portfolio, revealing a pattern of leveraging and fraud that stretched back years. Eleanor and Julian watched the first televised report from the main boardroom at Thorn Industries, the same room where they had planned their attack. The screen showed a grim-faced news anchor. "We are now getting reports," the anchor said, "that the entire case was blown wide open by an incredibly detailed financial analysis delivered anonymously to the SEC and the U.S. Attorney's Office just yesterday. Sources are calling the dossier a work of art, a perfect roadmap to a conviction." Julian permitted himself a small, thin smile, raising his glass of scotch to Eleanor. "A work of art, Miss Vance. Your finest, I believe." "I simply organized the data he provided." Eleanor replied, her voice cool, though a spark of grim satisfaction lit her eyes. Richard was always sloppy. The cameras cut to a live shot. It was Chloe Sterling née Vanderbilt, emerging from a black town car, shielded by two massive bodyguards, pushing through a phalanx of reporters. She looked terrified, her face pale beneath her perfect makeup. "No comment, I have no comment," she shrieked, a different woman from the bored socialite at the gala. The scene cut again. Robert Vanderbilt, his face a mask of stone, was being led from his office in handcuffs. Richard Sterling, the anchor continued, reportedly surrendered to federal marshals at his home an hour ago. He is being held without bail, as is his father-in-law. Julian muted the television. The silence in the room was heavy final. "It's done," Eleanor whispered. It wasn't a question. "No," Julian said, turning to face her. "The checkmate is complete, but the game isn't over until the king is off the board. Now they will turn on each other." Julian's prediction was, as always, precise. The bonds of marriage and family, built on a foundation of mutual greed, disintegrated on first contact with real consequences. Richard, sitting in a sterile white holding cell, was given one phone call. His lawyer was already en route, but he didn't call his lawyer. He called his wife. "Chloe, thank God." He breathed the receiver slick with sweat. "Listen to me, it's all a misunderstanding. It's a hostile attack by Thorn. I need you to post bail. It's high, but your father can." "My father?" Chloe's voice was a venomous hiss. "My father is in a cell next to you. The press is outside my home. The SEC is seizing the house. The cars, my accounts are frozen. Richard, Chloe baby, calm down. We're in this together. I can fix this. I just need you to—" "We are in nothing," she screamed, the sound so shrill it made him pull the phone from his ear. "My father's lawyers are here. They said you did this. You forged his name on the final transfer documents. You used me, you used our marriage to get to his company. You ruined me." "That's not true," he yelled, panic rising in his throat. "He told me to sign, it was his plan. You're a liar." She sobbed. "I'm a Vanderbilt. I am not going down with you. The lawyers are handling the divorce. It's over. Don't you ever call this number again." The line clicked dead. He stared at the receiver, the dial tone a mocking buzz. He had no money. He had no allies. He had no wife. He was for the first time in his life completely and utterly alone. The next betrayal was even more public. 2 days later, Robert Vanderbilt, having posted an astronomical bail, held a press conference. He stood at a podium flanked by a phalanx of the most expensive lawyers in the country. He looked solemn, heartbroken, and utterly convincing. "I stand before you today," he began, his voice thick with practiced emotion, "as a man and a father who has been deceived. Abused by a trusted partner, Mr. Richard Sterling, who exploited his position and his marriage to my innocent daughter to perpetrate a heinous, sophisticated series of financial crimes." In a holding room waiting to be transferred, Richard watched the press conference on a small, grainy television. His stomach turned to ice. "This man," Robert continued, "came into my family, into my company, and systematically poisoned it from within. We at Vanderbilt Holdings were like the city of New York, victims of his sociopathic ambition. We will be cooperating fully with the U.S. Attorney's Office to ensure that Mr. Sterling, and Mr. Sterling alone, is brought to justice." Richard sank onto the metal bench. Scapegoat. He was the scapegoat. The fall guy. The parasite, as Julian had called him, was being burned off by its host. The trial was a formality, a public execution. It lasted less than a week. The prosecution's case was built on the flawless analysis Eleanor had provided. A forensic accountant walked the jury through the digital trail, the hidden ledgers, the coded transfers. Every single one, while part of Robert's scheme, bore Richard's digital signature. He had been so eager to prove his worth, so eager to be the partner, that he had personally signed off on every illegal act. Robert Vanderbilt testified against him. Chloe testified against him, weeping as she described how he had fooled her. The most damning moment came during the sentencing recommendations. The prosecution introduced a file. "Your Honor, the DA said, we wish to establish a clear pattern of behavior. We have a victim impact statement from a Mr. Julian Thorne, CEO of Thorne Industries, detailing how 15 years ago Mr. Sterling stole proprietary data from him at JP Morgan, an act that professionally and financially ruined Mr. Thorne at the time. This was not a one-time mistake, Your Honor. This is who the defendant is." Richard's head snapped up. He looked at the prosecution table, stunned. Thorne. This was all Thorne. The judge read the statement, his expression hardening. He looked at Richard, his eyes filled with contempt. "Mr. Sterling, you are the worst kind of predator. Not one who uses a weapon, but one who preys on the trust of his partners, his investors, and his family. You are a man of profound intelligence and charisma, and you used those gifts for nothing but parasitic gain. You have shown no remorse, only surprise at being caught." The judge's gaze flickered to a separate sealed file on his desk, the one containing the paternity rights waiver. "You have left a trail of ruined lives," he said, his voice dropping. "It is the opinion of this court that you are a danger to the financial security of this community. On all 12 counts of wire fraud securities, fraud and conspiracy, I sentence you to 15 years in federal prison." The gavel cracked. Richard Sterling, the man who had worn 5,000 wholesaler suits, just stood there, his face completely blank. He didn't rage, he didn't weep. He just deflated. The smug, ambitious man was gone. All that was left was a hollow, empty shell. Life for Eleanor moved forward. The year that followed was not about celebrating Richard's demise. It was about building. The Future Grid project, under her meticulous, demanding leadership, launched ahead of schedule. Thorne Industries became the most powerful and respected corporation in the city. Eleanor Vance. The surgeon Tulursator was now one of the most powerful women in the country, but her transformation was more than professional. The alliance with Julian, forged in revenge, had been tempered by time, mutual respect, and the shared, profound love for a child. The late nights in the boardroom were replaced by dinners at home. Their new home, a sprawling but warm stone estate in upstate New York, was a sanctuary. It was a Tuesday night, a year after the trial. Eleanor was sitting at the massive kitchen island, a tablet in one hand, while Oliver, now 7 and impossibly bright, was explaining his model of the solar system to Julian. "And see, Dad," Oliver said, pointing a small finger. "Mars is red because of the iron oxide, which is rust. It's a rusty planet." "That's exactly right," Julian said, his focus entirely on his son. He had shed his suit jacket. His tie was loose, and the man the world knew as the Shark was patiently listening to a first grader. "But if it's covered in rust, what does that tell you about what used to be there?" Oliver's brow furrowed. "Rust needs water and oxygen. Wait. There was water on Mars." "That's what the science suggests," Julian said, smiling. Eleanor watched them, a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with power or profit. This was real. This was the life she had been fighting for, even when she didn't know it. Julian caught her eye, and his smile widened. It was a shared, quiet moment of pure contentment. The past was not entirely buried, however. One afternoon, Oliver came home from school, looking troubled. "Mom?" he asked, dropping his backpack. Andrew's mom read him a story from the paper. "He said my other dad is in jail. Is that Richard?" Eleanor's heart clenched. She and Julian had agreed always the truth, but always age-appropriate. She knelt, taking his hands. "Yes, buddy, that's true." "Why, do you remember when we talked about rules?" she asked gently. "How we have to tell the truth and we can't take things that aren't ours?" He nodded. "Well, Richard broke some very big, very important rules. He took things that belonged to other people, and he lied about it. And when grown-ups do that, they have to go to a timeout so they can't hurt anyone else. Prison is a timeout for grown-ups." "Oh," he processed this. "So he's a bad man." "He's a man who made a lot of very bad choices," Eleanor said carefully. Julian, who had been standing in the doorway, walked in. "He is your biological father, Oliver," he said, his voice firm but kind. "That means he helped make you. It's a fact, like the sky being blue. But that's all. A dad is someone who is here. Someone who helps with your homework, who reads you stories, and who teaches you how to be a good man." Oliver looked between them. Then he launched himself at Julian, wrapping his arms around his waist. "Like you, Dad. You're my dad." Julian's arms enveloped him, and he rested his chin on the top of his son's head. His eyes closed, were tight with emotion. "Yeah, buddy," he whispered. "Like me." For Oliver, the subject was closed. Richard wasn't a monster or a tragedy. He was just an explanation, an answered question. He was, in a word, irrelevant. Another year passed. It was a bright, crisp Saturday afternoon in October. Oliver, now 8, was on the long, winding driveway of their estate, his face a mask of fierce concentration. He was learning to ride his bicycle without training wheels. "You've got it, Oliver," Eleanor called from the terrace, laughing. "Keep pedaling. Eyes up, buddy. Look where you want to go," Julian shouted, standing on the lawn, his hands in his pockets. Oliver wobbled, overcorrected, and tipped over in a dramatic, giggling heap on the soft grass. "I did it, Mum. Dad, did you see? I went like 10 feet. "We saw." Julian laughed, walking over to help him up and check his helmet. Eleanor watched them, the perfect picture of father and son. Her son, her family. She felt a profound sense of peace. Julian ruffled Oliver's hair and sent him back to try again. He walked back to the terrace where a small fire was crackling in the outdoor fireplace. He stood beside Eleanor, but his expression was thoughtful. He was holding a single business-sized envelope. "This came to the office," he said quietly. It was forwarded from the old foundation address. Eleanor looked at it. It was addressed to Eleanor Sterling. The return address was Federal Penitentiary, Otisville. The handwriting was small, neat, and instantly familiar. It was from Richard. She felt nothing. No, that wasn't true. She felt a flicker not of pain or love, but of a distant echo, the ghost of a different life. "It's the first one," she murmured. "He's eligible for parole in 5 years. He's probably starting his Making Amends campaign." Julian said, his voice hard. "Do you want to know what it says?" Eleanor took the letter from him. She felt the paper thin and cheap. She looked at the handwriting she had once known on love notes, on birthday cards, on grocery lists. She could almost guess the contents. Excuses, blame, self-pity, and then finally a request. Forgiveness, a photo of his son. Money. She looked up. Across the lawn, Oliver had managed to get his balance. He was pedaling slowly, then, fast to his face, a supernova of triumph. "I'm doing it! I'm doing it!" he shrieked with joy. She looked at Julian, who was watching her, not the boy. His face held no judgment, only absolute trust. He would support whatever she chose. Eleanor Vance, the woman who had been left with nothing, walked to the stone fireplace. She held the letter over the flames, watching the edges curl and blacken. The name Eleanor Sterling vanished first. She dropped it into the fire, and they both watched as Richard's words, whatever they were, turned to ash and smoke. "What do you think he wanted?" Julian asked, slipping his arm around her waist. "It doesn't matter," Eleanor said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "He's 6 years too late." 8, Julian corrected her, kissing the top of her head. He was too late the day he walked out that door. "Mum, Dad, look no hands," Oliver shouted, immediately, wobbling and grabbing the handlebars, laughing hysterically. Julian laughed, a deep, genuine sound. "He's going to give me a heart attack." "He's happy," Eleanor said, her voice thick. "He's so completely happy." "We all are," Julian replied. She turned in his arms to face him. This is the real revenge, isn't it? Not the trial, not the prison. This." Richard thought the prize was the Vanderbilt name, and a penthouse apartment. Julian said, his eyes tracing her face. He was a fool. He had the entire world in his hands, and he threw it away because it was covered in paint. Eleanor smiled, a real warm smile that reached her eyes. He didn't just lose his son to his enemy, Julian. He gave his enemy a family. Julian's expression softened, and he leaned in, capturing her lips in a kiss that was not about alliance or victory, but about simple, profound love. "I did it," Oliver yelled, breaking to a stop in front of them, his face muddy and ecstatic. "Dad, did you see that I got air on the bump, Mum? I got air." Julian broke the kiss, a grin splitting his face. He scooped his son up, tossing him high into the air. "I saw you, little pilot, I saw." Eleanor watched them, her husband and her son, their laughter echoing in the clear autumn air. The ultimate revenge wasn't a calculated takedown. It was this. It was the laughter of a happy child who would never know the sting of abandonment. It was the love of a good man. It was the simple, devastating, and beautiful fact that Richard Sterling had not only lost, he had been forgotten. He had succeeded in erasing his past, and in doing so had erased himself from their perfect future. And there you have it. Richard Sterling thought he was upgrading his life, but he threw away the 2 people who would have been his greatest legacy. He didn't just lose his job, he lost his son to his greatest enemy, and his freedom to the wife he thought was weak. Karmic justice served ice cold. What did you think of Eleanor's ultimate revenge? Was it the boardroom takedown or the happy life she built? Let me know your favorite part in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. If you love stories of betrayal and ultimate karma, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel and ring that bell. We post new dramatic stories every single week, and you won't want to miss what's coming next.